today we'll be talking about how to maximize social return on investments of your programs. In this journey, we'll be talking about what is social return on investment traditionally. We will be looking at the history of social return on investments, and then we'll look at some of the benefits and challenges with the social return on investments. We'll also be talking about systematic process or how we can improve that process in a continuous basis, on a continuous data-driven approach that can help you maximize return like no other approach altogether. And we'll give you some examples how you can use that in various different scenarios, from due diligence process to regular data collection process, all the way to managing the verification or portfolio maturity altogether. So let's jump in. So let's look at the history of social return on investments. The social return on investment was started first in 1990 by REDF fund. Essentially, it's a short form, but for Roberts Enterprise Development Funds, and they developed the first SROI tool before they were investing into various different work that they've been funding altogether. And that work took on essentially that work was started by Social Value International, and Social Value International now is a very larger body of the program, where has practitioners network in many different countries altogether. And this program has obviously developed very systematic principles, frameworks, and analysis approach on how to build the SROI analysis based on SROI principles altogether. So what is social return on investments and how does it work? First, it's a principle and framework for measuring and accounting for the social value. So we'll talk about how that works. It's designed to incorporate any social, environmental, and economic cost and benefit analysis. So it's really about trade-off, cost versus benefit. And so as a result, it really is a ratio of benefits to the cost. Essentially, it's about driving outcome of the community or value rather than actual dollar amount altogether. And so if you look at the whole traditional approach of SROI, the foundation of SROI is starting with the SROI principles and methodology. And there are 7 most important principles, and that principle is really foundational elements. Number 1, involve stakeholders. It's all about stakeholders. If you don't bring and integrate the voice of stakeholders in the process, you are not really managing the impact altogether. Understand what is really changing. That's the next most important thing, which is really what is the outcome that you are creating in the community altogether. What is the value? What the things that matter? Essentially, it's about when you are creating impact, when you're introducing product or services, is that something that the poor people or the community that you're working, do they really matter to them? Do they really want that as the most important priority, or is that something that you want to offer to them? It's a prior one that really matters most. Included what is material in the process. So essentially, when you look at the whole process, there are many different aspects of mapping up the different impact altogether. However, it's important to focus on the most important outcome that matters most altogether, and take that process of key outcome and take it forward. Do not overclaim. Needless to say, many organizations, when you look at their impact reports, they are full of million people they serve, benefited, and really that's really oftentimes hyperbole or overclaim altogether. It's also a common term that's used, something is called impact washing or SDG washing as well. So the point of reporting and managing is really to maximizing the return of the community that you are really creating altogether, not really boasting something that doesn't really belong to your impact altogether. Be transparent. It's very important that you really share your best practices, your processes, how you came to analyze those things in a systematic manner altogether. And finally, verify the results. Verify, verify, verify. It's really about making sure that there is a process of auditing of various different aspects of it done. And so if you look at from bottom up on the right hand side, first you define the scope and the key of the stakeholders, map the outcomes, value to the outcomes, and enabling the impact, establishing impact. Finally, the last step is to calculating SROI, and based on that, you do the reporting process. That's a normal process of social return on investments. That said, there are benefits of SROI here and there are challenges of that. Benefits obviously are the number are easier to understand and communicate. That's needless to say. SROI ratio equal to 3. Is 3 is higher than 2? Of course it is higher. However, really it's all about necessarily context altogether. Secondly, for the investors, financial terms, it resonates well for them. They can see that, well, has a higher number than others altogether. Maybe it's likely to create more impact altogether. Allows comparison between the projects, benchmarking, have different outcomes and stakeholders and geographics. There are many projects and programs that do these things. We believe that there are better approach altogether. So here are the challenges. One is defining the financial proxy can be expensive. So in order to design the SROI, financial proxy is important. So for example, if volunteers are part of the process, then you define the number of volunteers hours multiplied by the dollar they would have really spent on that, or basically with their salaries essentially, and that would become a financial proxy. Now that's an easy example. In reality, designing financial proxy can be much more complicated, much more context specific, different country specific in all cases. There's a lot of subjectivity in the process, especially the processes where proxies are not well understood. You have to hire the researchers to come up with the process and analysis altogether. Does not take context into the consideration. Needless to say, things that you do things in a certain county and UK, it's going to be very different in Wisconsin versus the India altogether. And so there's a little qualitative room for the feedback. Half the time, it's more about understanding larger numbers and comparison game, but really oftentimes anybody who's working on a social program, they know that qualitative feedback sometimes often has a much more higher value because there's a lot more understanding of the impact comes out and by listening to the stakeholders altogether. And long-term timeline to see the results in the evaluation process. So is there any better approach? I think there is. There is a new way. So that's what we are here to talk about. So first is what we call a continuous evidence-based approach. And the way it works is that it's a very comprehensive approach, but it's really designed to be very focused. And so it really focuses on key outcome that you want to track altogether. And based on that, you engage stakeholders, and then you really bring out the interventions based on what you learn. And so if you look at these examples, you could be running these processes for various different areas, from due diligence process to impact maturity to stakeholder data collection process altogether, or continuous tracking part of it. So there are many different use cases of this approach altogether. And in our SoPact channel, we talk about many different ways, how we are achieving this social continuous data part of it altogether. So in case of, for example, due diligence. So I'm a fund manager and I want to see how each of these for investments are really going to be delivering on before even I invest into that. And the challenges for them obviously is that most of the investments tend to be a bit more different impact themes. And so how do you really standardize the process around that? So the first question is to define the impact questions, create a right baseline, and make sure that questions are actually aligned towards 5 dimensions of impact. If you've not heard of the 5 dimension impact, it's a foundation way to understand and communicate the impact. It really comes out to be who, what, how much, contribution, and risk. And we have many other videos that you can go into and learn about 5 dimensions of impact altogether. And based on that, apply the certain kind of scoring to see that it really it takes away some subjective into the process from evaluating your fund altogether. The next, oftentimes, asset managers or social impact accelerators, they can also use this approach to measure the maturity. Oftentimes, we always say that the best way that asset managers should be or accelerators should be measuring is not really by aggregating what their investments are doing or the investees are doing, but it's about what are they doing for them, how are they really bringing and making them more mature from financial perspective, from the business perspective, and from the impact measurement and management perspective. And so the main thing is to define those kind of target or initial baseline from their own investee, collect the results, and repeat the process regularly and really look at the target to see how things are improving altogether. So we have developed a very systematic process for funders' perspective, where we can help them maximize the impact through starting to improving the growing to scaling based on 4 different criteria: impact metrics, data, impact management capacity, and portfolio company stakeholders altogether. And so ultimately the idea is to end up in the lower right corner so that you are really generating, maximizing the social return on investments altogether. Same way, we have a similar classification for enterprises so that they can become most leading platform, leading enterprise who is maximizing impact. And in that sense, everybody is really looking to funding around that kind of initiatives which can scale impact in a much bigger way altogether. So in a nutshell, you could use this approach very heavily before you are building a product. During the product also, you can be continuously collect the data from the stakeholders. Ultimately, it's about building a capacity within your team and building a transparency. And building a transparency will automatically bring you high level of impact capital altogether. So in a nutshell, empower the companies. If you are a fund manager, make sure that the companies themselves has a good impact measurement management knowledge. Make sure there is a live dashboard and continuously tracking the results, and we can make their evidence-based decisions on a regular basis and not like a end of the year basis altogether. So I hope this segment was useful for maximizing the impact. We have many more videos coming up, and hopefully it will be useful. So if you like this approach altogether, please subscribe our channel and like this video altogether. That's how we share the more content to many of you altogether. Thank you.